How good are you at waiting? When you go to the supermarket and you're ready to check out, do you get aggravated that there's more than one or two people in front of you? Do you tap your feet when the people in front of you are slow at putting their things on the conveyor belt? Sometimes it's very difficult to wait. Perhaps the most difficult time of waiting is when we're waiting on the Lord. The Israelites in our first reading had a terrible time in their waiting. Moses had gone up to Mount Sinai to speak to the Lord and to receive the commandments. But he was gone for 40 days. And during that time, the people were restless. I wonder if any of them, during that time, actually prayed for the safety of Moses. I wonder if they prayed that Moses would do well in speaking to God. While Moses was up there conversing with God and receiving the commandments, the people are down below, and they are indeed restless, to the point that they're wondering what's going to happen to them. And they take matters into their own hands. Rather than praying, they decide what should be done. They tell Aaron, Moses' brother, that they need a God, that he needs to create a God. Rather than to think of the God who created them, they wanted to fashion a God. And Aaron tells them, take all the gold jewelry off of you. And he indeed makes this golden calf. And then they bow down to this thing that was just created, and they're calling it their God. How sad. As Aaron is doing this, he is indeed leading them into sin. And when Moses comes down and sees what's happened, he throws the tablets at the base of the mountain. They crumble. But then he takes this golden calf and he puts it back in the fire and he mixes it with water. And then he has all of the people drink it. So they take their sin in. They digest their evil. They recognize what they've done. And they are indeed sorry. Moses is so frustrated with his brother, and his brother lies straight to him. Says, I just threw the gold that people gave me. I just threw it in the fire, and this popped out. In the midst of waiting, these people sinned in numerous ways. Moses goes back up to the mountain and speaks to God. And ultimately, God gives commandments to the people again. And this time, they're finally ready to embrace the commandments, including the first one. I'm the Lord your God. I am the Lord. You shall not have false gods before me. How sad that when they could have been doing so much good during their time of waiting, the people just chose to sin. But I don't think they're the only ones who do that. Waiting is so hard for many of us. Waiting for the Lord is extremely difficult, especially when we've got it in our head what we need. And we keep on saying the same thing. God, my son, my nephew, my friend needs a job, needs it right now. God, please give us the job. And then we're waiting. We're waiting, God, give us that job. And when it doesn't happen, then what happens? Very often we get frustrated, we're angry, we feel God hasn't listened. Perhaps we can learn from the Israelites, learn from their mistake, to use time better. Time when we're waiting for something to change, to consider that maybe God does not want this for me. Maybe there's something even better, but more mysterious. And during this time when I'm waiting, when I place before God whatever it is that I feel is best, I place before God, and then I try to embrace God's will. If I focus on God's will, not my own, then I can change, and gradually I may get to the point of realizing what I had been praying for was not really what was best. Now I really want only God's will. Just on Saturday, I had a funeral, and this woman, a remarkable woman, married for 49 years, had 2 children, 3 grandchildren, taught religious education for over 20 years. But in the last 8 years of her life, she was in a wheelchair and often in pain. But when she felt pain, her response was, "Jesus, I love you so much." Imagine that. In the midst of her waiting for perhaps a healing, she was drawing herself to Jesus. And ultimately, she knew that she was going to be with the Lord when this life was over. I wish every one of us could learn from that, that while we're waiting on the Lord, we're doing something besides waiting. We're not grumbling. We're not complaining. We're not wondering if God has abandoned us. Instead, we're drawing ourselves to Jesus. Remember that phrase. When you have a headache, or when you have greater pain than just a headache, Jesus, I love you so much. Let us be drawn to Jesus while we wait on the Lord.